All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Nathan Smith. I'm the digital programming coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. Thank you so much for joining me today. Excuse me. Goodness. For Microsoft Excel Part 2, Formulas and Charts. Glad to have you here, and I hope you'll get a lot out of the session. Before we get started, there's a few quick preliminary things that I like to tackle right at the beginning of class. First of all, with these Excel sessions, if you want to follow along, you're definitely going to want to get a hold of the example files. So let me go ahead and throw that link in all the chat places here really quick, so that way you can go ahead and download those and get them opened up. So here we go. It was on the screen earlier, but of course, once I switch to talking with you, try to turn that screen sharing off. So there we go. Okay, you should find that. So it's cals.link/excel-2-files. You can click that link, or you can copy and paste it into your browser, and you should be good to go getting those example files, and that should help you follow along a little more easily. So yeah, go ahead and grab those. Go ahead and grab the handout. That's a nice little piece of reference material that you can use later on if you're interested. So yeah, definitely get a hold of that stuff, and I think that'll be pretty helpful for you. Once you so that's where that stuff is. The other big thing that I always like to tackle at the beginning of class is just to encourage you. This in this class, you definitely want to, or I definitely want to make sure that you can ask questions anytime you want. Don't worry about whether it feels like it might be a silly question or seems silly to me. That's not going to bother me at all. And there'll certainly be no criticism from me on that front. If also, if it's a bit off track, I'm not too worried about that either. The point of a technology class is for y'all to learn stuff. So if you don't understand what's going on and you need some clarification that you're not getting, or if there's some question in the back of your mind that's kind of distracting you from really absorbing the material, then that's going to be a problem, and it's going to make our class less successful than it otherwise would be. In fact, a class where I answer a bunch of great questions from folks, and we're able to get them exactly the information they need, I count as more successful than a class where I follow my outline, dot every I, and cross every T, but y'all walk away confused. So please ask those questions if you have them. How do you do that? Well, if you're joining me here in Zoom, what you'll want to do is look at the bottom of your Zoom window there, click on chat, and it'll bring up the little chat box, and you can just drop a message right in there and I'll see it. If you're joining me in Zoom, but you're on a mobile device, you can tap the middle of the screen, and you should see your little toolbars and stuff pop up there. If you tap the little ... then you should get a menu that pops up that gives you the option to open the chat there. If you are joining me via the live stream, all you need to do, if you're on Facebook, is comment on the video, just like you would any other post in all of Facebook, and I'll see that. And if you're joining me on YouTube on a computer, you'll see the live chat, usually on the right-hand side of your screen, or if you're on a mobile device, at the bottom below, well, at least below the video in the YouTube app. So ask those questions if you have them. By the way, I'm also not worried about interruptions. If someone, if I'm in the middle of saying something and you ask a question in chat, I might say, hold that thought, we'll circle back to it, or something like that. But I'm not going to be offended. Get those questions out there when they pop in your mind, and that way you won't have to worry about later on remembering what your question was, because sometimes that's difficult in my experience. So, okay. Let's see. Oh yeah. Also, please let me know if there are any technical difficulties. Use the chat or the comments or whatever you have access to on your particular platform to give me a heads up if my microphone is out or if you stop seeing my video, unless I say I'm going to turn my video off so y'all can see this. Or if there's some, if the screen freezes up or, any other technical problem like that, please let me know about that stuff too. I've definitely been in situations where my mic has been muted for a while and nobody bothered to tell me. And that's, again, not optimal for the effectiveness of our class. So please let me know if there's a problem. All right, here we go. So let's go ahead and dive in. Go ahead, if you would, if you've downloaded the example file and you're following along. By the way, you don't have to follow along if you don't want to. You can just watch or, you can watch and you can wait and follow along later on. That totally works. So if that's what you decide to do, that will not offend me. Don't feel bad about doing that. I want to make sure that, sometimes that's the way that folks learn best. So I have no problem with that. And I don't think you're going to get a worse experience if you decide to just watch rather than follow along, particularly the first time. If you want to go back later on and watch the recording, though, you certainly can. The easiest way to do that is to head to the CALS YouTube channel. That's cals.link/YouTube. All right, great. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in for real. Let me go ahead and fire up the screen sharing here and we'll get started. Let's see, here we go, here we go. All right, excellent. So I've got my Excel window open here. You'll notice right off the bat, if you when you look here, you'll see up at the top, a lot of times, at least, it'll say protected view up here, and give you a whole big warning about watching out for viruses and things like that. I have not put any viruses, like not even little ones, in this file. So you can go ahead and click enable editing like I'm going to do. You'll notice the file is named something bizarre. It says like part 2 and then a bunch of other junk here. That's okay. It's the service that we're using to host these files gives them these odd names, but it should work just the same. Also down here at the bottom, you'll want to go ahead and take a look here. Click on the basic math tab down at the bottom if you're not seeing the same sheet of data that I am. And that should work just fine. Let's see. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way here really quick. Great. Okay. Excellent. So before we dive into the meat of today's lesson, I want to go ahead and do a little bit of refresher. That way, I know there are a couple of folks who weren't here last week that are here this week. So I want to try and get folks up to speed, at least with the major things. And also there are, and in addition to that, there are folks who have slept since last week's session, including myself. So you might not remember all the little ins and outs. So let's go ahead and talk about some key terms really quick that are going to come up a lot in this session. So that way everybody's on the same page. Okay. So first term that I want to tackle in reviewing here is the term range. So a range of cells is just a group of cells that are located together, either in sort of a rectangle or in a line. So for example, this would be a range of cells, the range H4 to N22. And you write that just like this. Up in the formula bar, I'll write H4 colon N22. Make sure that's a colon and not a semicolon. You'll have to hold shift in order to get a colon and not a semicolon. So if you're not holding shift, it's not working properly. So that's how you write the address of the range. You put the name or the address of the first cell at the top left, then you put a colon, and then you put the cell at the bottom right of the group of cells that you're working with. So that's the range H4 to N22. Another way, let's get rid of that. I'm going to hit delete here. Another type of range would be just a line of cells. So either something like this. This is the range G3 to G37, or something like this. This is the range F10 to R10. So that's how, that's what I mean when I say a range of cells. It's just a group of cells, but they do have to be arranged in a rectangle or in a line. There can't be any gaps. Like if I have these cells and then I have these cells, that's not a range of cells. That's two ranges of cells. So when I say range, that's what I'm referring to. And there's a few more details in your handout as well. So if you, if you take a look at that later on, then you'll see some additional information that could be useful. Okay. The next term I want to tackle as a refresher is a formula. Formulas, I like to say, are the power tools of Excel. Basically, they are a way to make Excel figure something out for you rather than you having to do it yourself. So, so for example, some math, which we're about to do now, or you can have it look things up, which we'll do at the end of part 4. A whole bunch of different things you can do with formulas. In fact, too many things to remember. That's why if you click on the formulas tab up here at the top, you have this function library that helps, or that gives you reference information about all the little building blocks that you can use to create a formula. But formulas can be something very simple too, different types of calculations and or just kind of what ifs in a way. So that's a formula. It's it's not sorry. One key thing I forgot to mention there. A formula always begins with an equal sign. So anytime you want to write a formula in Excel, the first thing you do is put an equal sign there. On most keyboards, that's right next to the backspace key at the top. So you start with an equal sign and then you write the rest of the formula. And the equal sign is what triggers Excel to recognize it as a formula. So if you put an equal sign at the beginning of something, Excel will assume it's a formula, even if that's not what you meant. And if you don't put an equal sign at the beginning of something, Excel is not going to be able to figure out that it's a formula, even if it looks exactly like a formula in every other way. So make sure you always start your formulas with equal signs, and you never start anything else with an equal sign. Let me get some water here. All right. So a related term that I want to tackle here really quick is what we call a function. I mentioned this just briefly at the beginning of last week's session, but I want to touch on it again because it's going to become super important this time. Functions are the building blocks of formulas. So functions, one way I like to think of them is functions are sort of tricks that Excel already knows how to do. If you have a dog, for example, then maybe your dog knows how to sit or roll over. So you say, Rover, sit, and Rover sits down. You say, Rover, roll over, and Rover rolls over, right? So Excel's kind of the same way, except with data. So you can say, Excel, add, and it'll add together the information that you specify. Or you can say, Excel, fill in this text, and it'll do it, right? So that's what functions are. They're kind of building blocks for formulas. They're tricks that Excel already knows how to do, so you don't have to explain to Excel how to calculate an average, for example. The way that you find these functions is you can click up here in the Formulas tab and use this function library that I mentioned a moment ago, or you can Google it, and that's usually what I do, to be really, really honest with you. If you say in Excel, how do you calculate an average in your search box, then you'll be able to pull up something pretty quickly. Functions are really, really useful, though. I'm going to show you a bunch of really helpful functions today. Hopefully you will get a lot out of that. But they're, as I said, they're kind of the building blocks for your formulas. Couple of things to mention about that, and we'll see this in action here in a moment. Most functions, well, all functions are going to require a keyword, which is the name of the function. So if the function is the if function, which we'll talk about in a future session, then you'll type the word if, right? And then next to that is going to be a set of parentheses, a left parenthesis and then a right parenthesis. So on most keyboards, you're going to hold Shift 9 to get that left parenthesis and Shift 0 to get the right parenthesis. You do need both. And then in between them are going to be the information that you want the function to work with. So, for example, if you're adding some numbers together, you're going to put those numbers or some pointer to those numbers inside of the parentheses so that when you say Excel add, it doesn't go add what? It actually knows what numbers you want it to add up. So again, we're going to see that in action in a moment, but I do want to mention that. If you give it multiple pieces of data, and a lot of times you can, those pieces of data are separated from each other by commas inside the parentheses. And those pieces of data are called arguments. Again, we'll see all this in action. If you're like, oh, that seems like a lot, bear with me. We'll get there, I promise, and it'll be clear to you. Finally, sheets. I just want to refresh you on this because we're going to be doing this several times throughout the session. In your Excel files, an Excel file is called a workbook, not a spreadsheet, because it can contain multiple spreadsheets. And that's just like a book, which can contain multiple pages, right? With different sets of information on them. So your workbook can contain multiple sheets. Down here at the bottom, these little tabs are the sheets in question. So basic math is the sheet that we're going to start with. Then we'll switch over to copy, paste, and autofill just by clicking the name of the sheet down at the bottom with the mouse. And then we'll move to the breakout session sheet and so on. So these are just different sets of information that are stored inside the same file. You just click to move between them. If you are creating, when you're creating your own workbooks, you can click this plus sign to add a new sheet to your file. You can right click them to delete a sheet if you need to, and so on and so forth. So plenty of different ways to, you can play around with those as you see fit. Depending on your version of Excel, you might not be able to use undo to undelete a sheet if you delete it. So be careful about that. But other than that, I just mentioned this so that it's a smooth transition for us from sheet to sheet as we go to different examples during class today. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to some examples here. So last week at the end of the session, what we did was we wrote actually our second formula. So the first formula we wrote took the name of the person at the top of the list over here in cell A4 and just duplicated that name over here in cell F4. But then we wrote a formula that added all of these income numbers together for our example people on this basic math sheet so that we could see the total amount brought in by all of these like fake salespeople, right? So let's rewrite that formula again, just to refresh our memory and dip our toes back in. What I'm going to do is select cell C2 at the top of the sheet here. I'm going to click in the formula bar. Now, again, as I mentioned last week, when you're writing a formula, clicking in the formula bar in order to type it out is not strictly required. You can type the formula out down here in the body of the sheet, but I find it more difficult to correct mistakes if I'm doing that. So I almost always write my formulas in the formula bar directly. And so you'll see me take that extra step of clicking up there. You don't have to do that, but I do encourage it because it's going to make your life easier, I think. All right, so I've got my cursor up here at the top, blinking away. So now I'm ready to write my formula. I'm going to hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula, first of all. And then I'm going to type the word sum, S-U-M, which of course is the answer to an addition problem in math. So if somebody in kindergarten or whatever puts 2 plus 2 in front of you, then 4 is the sum that we're talking about, right? So S-U-M. Then I'm going to open a set of parentheses. So I'm going to hold shift while pressing 9 on my keyboard. And then inside the parentheses, I've got, I'm ready to write my arguments, as I mentioned before, the information that this sum function is going to work with. I mentioned those functions a moment ago. You have the keyword. In this case, the keyword or the name of the function is sum. And then you have the parentheses. So we've got our left parenthesis. We're going to add the right parenthesis in a moment. But for now, we need to write what's in between. So Excel actually gives us this really helpful hint thing. What that does is, okay, nope. What that does is it will, it'll give us suggestions of, well, it'll actually tell us specifically what kind of information we need in order for this function to work. So the sum function here, it needs specific kinds of information. Specifically, it needs numbers, right? Because we're doing addition. So down here, it says number 1 in bold, and then there's a comma. The bold tells me this is what you're filling in right now, or what you're about to fill in. And then number 2 in square brackets here, that tells me you can add something else, but it's optional. And those are separated by commas, which is how you work with the separate pieces of information or groups of information in your function. For now, though, we're not going to get that complicated. What we're going to do is type C4. And you'll notice when I do, it color codes in blue here. And I get blue in the cell itself down here in the body of the sheet. Then I'm going to put a colon. So I'll hold shift while pressing that key right next to the L on my keyboard, just to the right of L while holding shift. So I've got C4 colon and then C100, just like that. C4 colon C100. So you'll notice now I have it color coded all the way down from cell C4 here to cell C100 down here. So looking good. So far, so good. It's all color coding correctly, so I can tell that it's probably going to work. Then I'm going to close my parentheses. Whenever in a formula in Excel, whenever you have a left parenthesis, you have to have the right one too, 100% of the time. So I'm going to hold shift while pressing 0 on my keyboard. And that's going to give me C4 colon C100 inside of those parentheses. And now I'll either press enter on my keyboard, press tab to move to this cell, which I don't really want to do, or the best option in this case, because I want us to be able to continue to look at this formula, I'm actually going to click this little check mark next to the formula bar. When I do that, it confirms what I typed in, but it leaves this cell selected. So that way I don't have to go anywhere else in order to look at the formula some more, or I don't have to reselect this cell if I want to keep it selected. So, so what we've got, our formula here is equal sign sum, and then inside our parentheses, C4 to C100. So what it's doing is it's taking all of these cells from C4 down to C100, anywhere there's a number, and it's adding all those numbers together and just giving us this total, $28,727.68 is what we've got. So that's looking good. Next to that, I've got my total expenses in cell, or that is labeled over here in column D. So I want to go ahead and put a similar formula here to calculate those total expenses out of these numbers. I'll put it in cell D4. So I'm going to make sure that cell's selected. Come up here to the top, click in that formula bar, hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. I'll type again the word sum, S-U-M, open a set of parentheses, so shift 9, and then I'm going to go D4 colon D100. All right, I'm going to close my parentheses once again, so I'll hold shift while hitting 0, and that is going to color code and so I've got all these cells color coded again from D4 down to D100. And now I'm going to either hit the check mark or press enter on my keyboard or whatever. And now $18,896.13 is my total expenses number. So now I've got this section here for a net total. And there are a couple of different ways to do this. Let me show you, let me show you one way now, and we'll circle back and I'll show you actually, there are 3 different ways we can do this right now. I'm going to show you one way now, and we'll talk about a couple of others here in a sec. So the way that I'm going to do it to start is I'm going to click here in cell E2, just under where it says net total, and I'm going to click in the formula bar. I'll hit my equal sign once again to tell Excel to expect a formula. And then again, I'm going to type the word sum. Now, some of you who've thought this through might find that a little strange. After all, if we're looking for a net total, we want the total income number minus the total expenses number for however much money we brought in altogether after all was said and done. So really what we're doing is subtraction, not addition. But there's no equivalent function to the sum function for subtraction in Excel. I'll show you how we can do subtraction in just a sec. But there's no difference function, which would be the equivalent to do subtraction. So I'm going to type the word sum. I'm going to open a set of parentheses. I'll go shift 9. And then inside the parentheses, again, I've got the sum of number 1, number 2 in square brackets, which means it's optional, comma, ... So I can add additional numbers if I want to. Okay, so what we want to do is take our income number and subtract our expenses. So we already have our income number calculated here. It's in cell C2, right? So I'm just going to type C2. And you'll notice it color codes there. Then I'll put a comma. And you'll notice, whoops, when I put the comma, number 1 is no longer in bold. Number 2 in square brackets is in bold now. And then we have comma and then number 3 in square brackets. So with our previous formulas, we actually only had one piece of data that it was working with in a way. We only had one range of cells, that C4 to C100 or D4 to D100, that we're adding together to give us our sum. In this case, though, we're doing 2 separate, what we called a moment ago, arguments, 2 separate pieces of data or groups of data. So we've got our C2, our income number, and now we want to subtract our expenses. To do that with this sum function, what we need to do is make it a negative number. So I'm going to put the negative sign right there. So minus sign either up next to the 0 or over on your number pad if you use, if you use the number pad on your keyboard. And then I'm going to go D2. So negative sign D2. So what we're doing is we're adding the negative of our expenses number, which, if you remember from back in the day, is the same as subtracting. I'm going to close my parentheses here, press enter to lock this in, or click the check mark. Either way works. I'll hit enter this time. And our net total is $9,831.55. That's how much we have left of the income after we subtract the expenses. So that is, so we've got all our numbers filled in here at the top, and now we can move on. Now, again, one more thing that I mentioned last week, but I do want to remind you. The reason that I have these formulas at the top, even though they're totals here, I have them at the top rather than at the bottom, like you would do it on a piece of paper. And the reason that I wrote it as C4 to C100 and D4 to D100 rather than just going down to C29 and D29 is the same reason. If I were to add additional data to my sheet, then at that point, even if I have the formula at the top, I'm at least going to have to rewrite it. So if I had D4 to D29, then if I added five more numbers, then I'm going to have to change it to D4 to D34, right? And then if I have it down here at the bottom, not only do I have to move it, I have to rewrite the formula. So I'd have to, or not only do I have to rewrite the formula, I have to move it as well. So in addition to changing it from D4 to D29 to D4 to D34, I would also have to move it down to D35 in order to fit all of my data there. And also, if I have a really long list of data, then it's probably not all going to fit on my screen. And so I'm going to have to scroll. And if I just want to glance and see the total, then it's best to have it at the top, because otherwise, if it's at the bottom, I have to scroll all the way down to even find the total and glance at it. So all in all, at the top is, I find, typically the best way to go with a lot of these things. Okay, so let's talk about some other basic math functions. There are a lot of options here, and we're not going to dig into everything, but we do want to. I do want to show you a few of these, particularly since it makes it easier to get the hang of these, of using these functions when you're doing them for something fairly simple, like, third grade math. So let's go ahead and dive into these other basic math functions. So we talked about the sum function, or let's get some numbers going on here. So I'm going to just put some in. Okay, there we go. All right, I put some numbers in. Y'all don't have to use the same numbers that I do, but you can if you want to. So I've got these numbers here, and I'll go ahead and actually, I'm just going to leave a little gap here to make it easier to see. And in fact, I'm going to come up here and click bold, so that way what I'm doing is in bold. And let's zoom in also. Okay, cool. So I've got these numbers here, and then up at the top in cell G2, I'm going to do some calculations using basic math functions. So we use this, with the sum function, if we wanted to add some of these together, obviously, if we wanted to add all of them together, we would go equal sign, type the word sum, open a set of parentheses, so shift 0, and then we would just go G, 4 colon G 13, just like that. And then shift 0, close our parentheses there. And then I'll hit the check mark or press enter on my keyboard to lock it in. And we've got 290 is the grand total for all of these numbers. But let's say we only wanted to add up the single digit numbers here. We'd have to change this formula a little bit. What I'm going to do is select the cell and then come up here to the top, click in the formula bar, and I'll just hit backspace a few times in order to get rid of colon G13, parenthesis, right? So I've got G4. That's the first one with a single digit number. And then I've got G8 and G9 are the next ones. So I'm going to need to put a comma here. So G4, comma, and then I could either go G8, comma, G9. And you'll notice G8 is color coded in red. G9 is color coded in purple because in terms of Excel formulas, they're separate arguments. So they're different pieces or sets of data, right? And then comma G13, and that's color coded for me in blue. Or I could actually write it in a slightly different way, G8 colon G9, whoops, colon G9. And you'll notice both those cells are color coded in red. So I'm pointing to this as a range of cells. It only has 2 cells, but it's a range of cells rather than just as 2 individual cells separately. Either way works the same. But of course, if I had 3 different cells here, it's going to be easier for me to type, say if this was a single digit number, it'd be easier for me to type G8 colon G10 rather than G8, comma, G9, comma, G10. So up here at the top I'm going to close my parentheses and then I'll hit the check mark. 24 is the total of 8 plus 9 plus 6 plus 1. Nice. Okay, so we've done that. Let's change it up. So what I'm going to do is, whoops, okay, I'm going to actually cancel that. I'm going to click on the cell to select it, make sure that I'm not editing, that I don't have the little blinking cursor anywhere, and I'm going to hit the delete key on my keyboard. Boop. There we go. And then I'm going to come back up here and click in the formula bar, hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. And then we're going to use the product function. So I'm going to type the word product, P-R-O-D-U-C-T, and I'm going to open a set of parentheses. Hold shift, press 9, excuse me. And then I'm being prompted for basically the same thing as we had for the sum function. So number 1, comma, number 2 in square brackets, comma, ... So you can add more numbers or sets of numbers if you want to. In this case, if I wanted all these numbers multiplied together, it's going to come up with something huge, but we'll give it a shot. I'm going to go G4 colon G13, close my parentheses, press enter. And yes, it's a very, very huge number to the point where they used kind of abbreviated notation to fit the whole number into my cell there. If I widen it out though, and I just go number, it's this very, very long number. Okay. So again, let's say I want to do only let's say I only want to get like 3 of these. So 13, 41, and 10. So I'm going to come back up here and backspace everything except for product and the left parenthesis there. And then I'm going to go G5, which has 13 in it, comma, G7, which has the 41 in it, comma, G12, close my parentheses, G5, G7, and G12, 13 times 41 times 10 is 530 or 5,330. Nice. So that's the product function. It works very similarly to the sum function. So let's branch out a little bit and let's try something different. All right, I'm going to, again, select the cell, make sure that I'm not editing it so I don't have the little blinking cursor either here or here. So I'm going to get out of that, hit the escape key on my keyboard at the top left, or click the cancel little X over here next to the formula bar. I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard to clear this cell. And then I'm going to come up here to the top, click in the formula bar, hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. And I'm going to use the word quotient, Q-U-O-T. Whoops. Gosh, I'm terrible at typing today, apparently. Quotient, quotient. I'll open a set of parentheses here. And then I'm being prompted for something different. So we're still sticking with our theme. The sum was the answer to an addition problem. The product is the answer to a multiplication problem. And the quotient is the answer to a division problem here. So if you're dividing one number by another, then the answer that you get is called the quotient, right? But in division, you can't divide a whole bunch of numbers together. You have to choose two. So there's the numerator, the number you're dividing, and there's the denominator, the number you're dividing by. There are exactly two numbers involved in division. If you don't have two numbers, you can't do division. So the numerator, in this case, let's say I want to do 71 here. So the numerator is going to be G6. There we go. Color-coded blue for me. Perfect. And then I'll put the comma. So once I put the comma in there, again, just notice the bold goes from numerator to denominator. So now I've already got the numerator in. I put the comma to close it off and say, that's the numerator. And now the denominator is what I'm being prompted for after the comma there. The denominator is the number we're dividing by. So let's divide by the 8. That's G6. Nope, excuse me, G4. There we go. And again, it's color-coded for me in red. I'll close my parentheses. And there we have it. I'll hit the check mark or press enter on my keyboard. And I get 8. In fact, 8.00, because I set this number. Let me go ahead and change it back to general. Because 8.00 makes it really misleading. Whereas this is kind of misleading. So 8 times 8, for those of you who remember your times tables, 8 times 8 is actually 64, not 71. So we got 8, or 8.00 here. This quotient function is a good way to divide, but I want to clarify exactly what it does. It divides your numbers and it ignores anything left over, any remainder, as we say in math. So really the answer is like 8.125, or no, excuse me, 8.875. Excuse me. But since any remainder is ignored when you use this quotient function, that's not how it just gives us 8 straight up. If I want to divide and include, if I want to divide more precisely and get like a decimal answer or a fraction or something, I need to divide in a different way. Let me show you. So rather than quotient G6, G4, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up and delete all this. So I've got equal sign, and then I'm just going to go after the equal sign G6 / G4. By the way, folks get the / and the / mixed up. You can tell by whichever one is at the top. The / is kind of leaning forward to the right, whereas the / is kind of leaning backwards. There's never a / in any web address, by the way, just /. So you've got G4 / or G6 / G4. And of course, the / also appears at the top of your number pad if you've got a keyboard that includes the number pad over on the right. So G6 / G4, I'll hit the check mark or press enter on my keyboard. And we get, yes, 8.875. Or If I come up here again, we can mess with our number formats like we did last week. I'll come up here to the top where it says general, click on that drop down box, and I can change it to fraction, and we get 8 7/8, which makes sense. There's probably also a way to treat the remainder separate from the rest of the division problem. I'm not 100% sure on that, though. I haven't looked into it, but you could do something like that. So that's the best way to divide if you want a fraction or a decimal. Basically, if you don't want Excel to just set aside the remainder. Sometimes you need to set aside the remainder, though, if you're making, if I were making packages of 8 chicken nuggets and I had 71, I simply can't make more than 8 packages of chicken nuggets with 71 nuggets, right? I can only make, or I can't make 9. I could only make 8 packages of chicken nuggets with 71 nuggets. If I had that 72nd nugget, then I could make 9 of them. But nope, I can only make 8. So sometimes you don't need that remainder or want it, or it's just confuses the issue. But sometimes you do. And so using the slash to divide is a better way. But you can also do this with other types of math. So rather than if you wanted to multiply 8 by 71, rather than using the product function, you could replace that slash with the asterisk. So on some keyboards, you're going to need to hold Shift and press 8. If you have the 10 key number pad, then you can use you can just use the asterisk there. Once I hit the check mark or press enter, 568 is the total of G6 times G4, or 8 times 71. If I wanted to subtract, then I'll get rid of this asterisk and I'll put a negative sign there, or minus sign. So G6 minus G4, 63. 71 minus 8 is 63. And then if I want to add, I can put a plus sign in there. So 79. 71 plus 8 is 79. So I know that that's simpler. It's easier to read, but I did want to show you the way to do, or how to do math this way, because if you've got something like this, you can't do this addition with a plus sign. You really kind of have to do it with the sum function here. And if you're doing more complex things or writing other types of formulas, you definitely want to be comfortable with this, with using these functions in order to do the things that you want to do in Excel. So that's why I showed you this way first, because functions are super important, and basic math is a really good way to get a handle on how to use them. Okay, one last basic math function, and then we'll move on to some other examples here. In this, in column C here, we have all these income numbers. Let's say I want to average out my total income number, or I want to average out the income number for my salespeople and see how they're doing on average overall. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just find a cell somewhere, click in it, click in my formula bar, hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. And then I'm going to type the word average, AVERAGE, open my parentheses. And then again, I'm being prompted, like with the sum function or the product function, for number 1, comma, number 2 in square brackets, etc. So I want to give it the set of numbers that I'm calculating an average for. And I can do it the exact same way that I did up here in C2. So I'm going to go C4 colon C100. Then I'm going to hold Shift while pressing 0 to close my parentheses, hit the check mark to confirm, or press enter to confirm. And our average income number over here is $1,104.91. That's what the average person who does not exist brought in. However, some of you might have a question at this point. You'll notice all of these empty cells. The way that averages are calculated is you take the number of numbers that you have. Well, first you take the numbers that you have and you add them all together. And then you take the number of numbers that you added together and you divide by that, right? So when I do that, we get, there are 26 cells here. You can see that down at the bottom, by the way. There are 26 cells here. So basically we're taking the total, this total, 28,727 and 68 cents, and dividing by 26. And that gives us the average. But I wrote the formula as C4 to C100. So there are all these blank cells. In some cases, like this case, Excel will ignore blank cells. It will treat them as if they don't exist, basically, until you put something in them. Even if it's a 0, you'll notice my average goes down here because now I have something in here and it's dividing by 27 rather than by 26. If I delete this, average goes back up. In other cases, though, Excel will treat a blank cell as a 0. So you just want to be careful and know when it's going to do that or when it's not going to, or look it up. It's perfectly fine to look it up. You know, there's that's what I do all the time in a lot of different situations. So just be mindful of that. Sometimes Excel will treat an empty cell as nothing, what we call a null value in computer world. Other times it will just treat a blank cell as a 0. So be mindful of that and know which situations it's going to do which thing. Because of course, if you had this, if you added someone else, you know, another salesperson or two, and then there was somebody who didn't have any income yet from their sales, then you would have to put 0 here in order for the average to be calculated correctly. All right. What questions do y'all have about that stuff before we move on to the next? Oh, sorry. One more thing here. Okay. Now that we've got all that under our belt, over here at the top in cell E2, we've got our net total. But let's say that let's say that these were gone. I'm going to select those, just hit delete. And then right now it's showing our net total as 0 because it's taking it from C2 and D2. Let's say we wanted to calculate this net total without either of these intermediary numbers here that we got at the top. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put a function inside of a function in order to make that work. So I'm going to select cell E2. I'm just going to hit delete on my keyboard to clear it out. And then I'm going to come up here to the top in the formula bar, hit my equals sign, type the word sum, S-U-M, open a set of parentheses. And then inside of my parentheses, we're being prompted for our arguments, number 1, number 2 optionally, number 3 optionally, and so forth. What I want to do inside this is I want to type the word sum again and open another set of parentheses. You'll notice this second left parenthesis is red because this is going to be a set of parentheses inside the other set of parentheses. So I've got the sum function inside of this other sum function. And now what I want to do is basically write the formula that we had here over in cell C2. So I'm going to go C4 colon C100 and close my parentheses, C4 to C100. And then outside of the, you'll notice when I add the next parenthesis, it also makes that one red. So you can tell since these are color coded alike, they go together. Outside of this set of parentheses, though, I'm going to hit the comma, and that is going to, and now we're being prompted for that second argument, number 2, right? So I'm going to type the word sum one more time, open a set of parentheses, shift 9, and then C4 colon C1, whoops, 100. Oops. Okay, that's not what I want. I want D4 to D100 because I'm getting my my total expenses, right? I'll go ahead and close my parentheses here. So I'm going to hold shift while pressing 0. So I should have sum, and then inside the parentheses, D4 to D100. But we're using that sum function, so I do need to put a negative sign after the comma, but before the third sum right there to make my expenses number negative. Finally, at the end of my formula, I'm going to put one more right parenthesis, so shift 0 again, to close the black set of parentheses here. So again, for every left parenthesis, you got to have a right parenthesis. So we had so I had a left parenthesis here and then another one, but then I closed that second set out. And then I added another left parenthesis and I closed that set out. But then I needed a black parenthesis to close off this this original set here and get all of these things inside of the first sum function. So what I'm doing is I'm basically just putting the formulas that we had here inside of another sum function so that it adds it all together and making this one negative so that it's actually subtraction. I'll hit the check mark. And there we go. Same net total, $9,831.55. Great. Okay. So what questions do y'all have about any of the stuff we've done so far? I've got to get some water really quick. So give me just a moment to do that and type out any of those questions that you have in the chat, in the comments, and we'll tackle them really quick. Then we'll move on to the next set of examples here. All right. I don't see anything here. So if you're typing a question, please keep typing and we'll make sure your question gets addressed. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get into this. So here we go. What I'm going to do for the next set of examples is click on this copy, paste, and autofill sheet down at the bottom. And that'll take us to this, or that'll take us to this example right here. Okay. In this example, I'm keeping track of, again, an income and expenses number. Okay, I'm not sure I follow that. Put up the formula to going to see the lecture after the class. Oh, the link. Yeah, so the easiest way to get to, if you want to circle back and rewatch later on, is on the Cal's YouTube channel, cals.link/YouTube. And it should be near the top of the uploads there because I'm streaming it to the YouTube channel right this moment. Let's see. Cool. Excuse me. All right, great. So now what we've got over here is I've got my, I'm on this copy, paste, and autofill sheet. And I'm keeping track of income and expenses for, some potentially smaller budget throughout the year just to see what everything's looking like. And so I have a monthly income number, a monthly expenses number, and a balance here. So we brought in $84 in January. We spent $54, so we ended up with a balance of $30. And then in February, we had $56, or we brought in $56. We spent $1 combined with the original 30 that we ended up with from January. That gives us $85, right? So I'm keeping track of a balance here, and I am using a formula in order to do that. If you look at the formula, so this formula is a little different because it's the top. There's nothing that it's pulling from the previous month. So we just have B2 minus C2, income number minus expenses, right? This one down here, though, we have B3, that's our income number for February, minus C3, our expenses number for February, plus D2, and that's that balance of $30 that we had from January. And I want to basically carry this formula forward throughout the rest of the year, right? So what I could do is come down here, click in this cell and type equal sign B4 minus C4 plus D3, and then I'd be good to go, right? I would get the next balance. But life's too short. I don't want to be stuck doing that. So I'm going to do it in a more convenient way. What I'm going to do is use copy and paste to make this happen. So there are a number of different ways to do this. One very common way that folks do is they'll come up and they'll click with the right mouse button or tap with 2 fingers. If you're using a touchpad on a laptop, you can tap with 2 fingers and that'll give you the same effect as clicking with the right mouse button on a traditional mouse. So that opens up the little, what we call the context menu here, this list of options, and I can click copy here and that'll work just fine. The option that I usually use, though, is a little more convenient once you get the hang of it. What I usually do is hold Control on my keyboard, or Command if you're on a Mac. Hold Control, and then while I'm holding Control, press C as in cat on my keyboard. That is going to, either one of those actions, though, is going to copy this cell, and you'll see the little dotted lines around it showing that the contents of the cell have been copied. Then once I come down here, I'm gonna or then down here underneath my, or in cell D4, I can paste. Now what I'm actually going to do, though, is I'm going to click in cell D4 and I'm going to drag down until I get all of D4 to D13 selected at once, just like this. And then I'm going to paste. I recommend not clicking with the right mouse button for this. If you right click here, what's going to happen is you'll get a bazillion different options to paste, and it's going to be kind of hard to choose one. So the paste options are interesting. I definitely recommend kind of digging into that on your own time, but it's not something we need to spend a ton of time on here in this session. So we're not going to really cover that. What I'm going to do instead, though, is I'm just going to either come up here and click the little clipboard with the sheet, which is kind of the standard default paste option, or on my keyboard, I can hold Control or Command if you're on a Mac and press V as in Victor on my keyboard. And that is going to paste all those, and that's going to paste this in. Now look carefully at what's happening here. I've got B3 minus C3 plus D2. That's my original formula. But when I click down here in cell D4, suddenly it changes to B4, C4, and D3. On row 5, it's B5, C5, and D4, and so on and so forth. Excel is smart enough that it will automatically change those row numbers or column letters if you're going horizontal. So if I pasted from column D over to column G, it'll change the column letters. But it'll change that automatically based on where your formula originally was versus where you're pasting it into. And that's really, really handy most of the time. Sometimes it can be a pain, and that's why there are all those additional paste options like this. But most of the time it works out really, really well. And Excel translates your formulas so that they work in the spot where you need them to be. So that's copying and pasting. It's super duper easy. One thing to bear in mind, though, right now this is copied. If I hit escape on my keyboard, it's going to uncopy it essentially. Or if I copy something else, or there's some weird stuff. If it's not if it doesn't have a dotted line around it, it's definitely not copied and it's not going to paste anywhere. So just bear that in mind. Even if you're working in another Excel window with a different document, you can only have one thing copied at a time. So just be mindful of that. Okay, so far so good. We've got our formula working. You'll notice 85 plus 84 minus 97 is 72. And then 72 plus 314 minus 47 is 339. So our formula is working correctly. Great. All right. Over here, though, I left something else out. I wrote January, February, and March, and then I got tired and went to sleep, right? So I want to fill this in, but again, life's too short. I don't want to type out the rest of the names of the month. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to, of the months, excuse me. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is come over here. And so you'll notice whenever you select a cell, you get a box, and then there's a little dot in the bottom right corner. And if you select multiple cells, same deal, box in the like the little dot in the bottom right corner. What I want to do is I want to select these 3 cells that say January, February, and March. So I'm going to click in the first cell, excuse me, and drag with my mouse until all 3 cells are selected. Then I've got the dot. I'm going to move my mouse over it. And you'll notice normally my mouse, when I'm working inside of the spreadsheet, is like this block cross thing, right? Or plus sign probably is actually more what it is. If I move it over this dot, then you'll notice it turns into the same plus sign, but just with black lines rather than being kind of outlined and having the little drop shadow behind it. So I'll move over here, put my mouse over that dot so that it turns into that other type of plus sign, hold down with my mouse button and drag until I get down to cell A13 here. Then I'm going to let go. And Excel looked at this and followed the pattern to add the other month names over here on the left-hand side. So it's all we had January, February, and March. And it's like, oh, that's a very predictable pattern. Let's go April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Great. This is a feature called AutoFill. AutoFill is really, really useful because it can follow patterns like this. Your kind of $5 word for today is it extrapolates based on the information that you give it. So there's information that's there, and it uses that information to continue the pattern forward. So really easy with these month names over here. In addition to that, though, obviously I could do it with something like numbers. So I go 3, 6, 9. And then if I select these, hold down on the dot in the corner and drag it down, then I get 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, et cetera, et cetera. So that's simple enough. But sometimes it can go wrong. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to undo this. I'll click the little undo button up here in the corner. And then I'm just going to select this cell that has 9 in it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit because I forgot to do that earlier. I'll select the cell that has the 9 in it, and I'm going to drag down from the corner again. But this time you'll notice there's a problem. 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. It did not follow the pattern. The reason for that is when I was getting autofill set up, I selected only the cell that had the 9 and none of the other cells here. So even if I get just the 6 in the mix, suddenly it will figure it out. It'll go, oh, we're probably counting by 3s. And so it goes up to 60 that way. But if you give it just one piece of data to work with, typically it's going to just duplicate that over and over again. There's one other exception, though, that's super duper important. If I come over here, let's say that I delete this, delete these extra formulas that I filled in here using copy and paste. If I do that, I've got my $85 here. What I want to do, if I select this cell, click on the dot and drag it down, you'll notice it actually does the same thing. So if you look at these formulas, We're on row 7. We get B7, C7, and D6, just like we had before. So AutoFill will do that with a formula. It will automatically copy it down and change the row numbers or the column letters depending on where you're filling to. One other nice little thing that AutoFill does, it has this kind of sibling feature called flash fill. One more time, I'm going to delete these. I'm going to click on this cell with the formula one more time. And then I'm going to come up to the dot and I'm going to double click. And that'll do the same thing. But what it did was it filled in all the cells until there was no data next to it here on row 14. On row 14, it went, oh, that's the end of their data. And it stopped populating new versions of the formula for those rows. So that's really, really handy if you want to just quickly fill in a bunch of stuff there. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to this breakout sessions sheet, because I want to show you one more pitfall here that we can avoid, and a couple really useful features you can use to do it. I'm going to click on this breakout sessions sheet down here, and here's what we've got. Okay, so in this example, I'm planning some sort of a professional conference, and we have little breakout sessions all day. There's a time management session from 9 to 10:30. There's a computer tips session at 10. There's a marketing session at 1:30, and there's an Excel session at 3:30. So over here in cell E3, I've noted that the session length is 1 hour and 30 minutes long. And in fact, in cell C2, I've got a formula that's calculating that out. So I had my start time here, 9 a.m., and it's going B2 plus E3. That's my session length. And that gives me, so 9 a.m. plus 1 hour and 30 minutes gives me 10:30. By the way, again, you can do this because times and dates are stored as little serial numbers inside of Excel. So you can add and subtract them just like you would with any other number. So far, so good. 9 a.m. plus 1 hour and 30 minutes is 10:30 a.m. But watch what happens if I flash fill this on down. I'm going to make sure this cell's selected, double click on the little dot in the corner. And now I get 10 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 3 o'clock. So all of these are wrong. They're not long enough. If you look at this formula, you can see exactly why that is. I have it set up as, or I have it listed as B5 and E6. Well, E6 is this cell right here. So it's taking 3 p.m. and it's adding nothing. So the problem is Excel was trying to be clever. So it added 1 to each row number as we copied the formula down. But the problem is we didn't want to add 1 to the row number here. We wanted that row number to stay the same so that Excel would continue to look at cell E3 where we had the session length listed out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a version of this formula that's kind of copy proof so that it will actually work. I'm going to come up here. So I've clicked back in cell C2 where the original formula was. I'm going to come back up here, and in my formula bar, I'm going to go between the E and the 3. So I'll click right there. You'll notice my cursor is there. And in between the E and the 3, I'm going to put a $sign. Just like that. So now it's E $3. I'll hit the check mark or press enter or whatever. And nothing happens here because all I changed was this formula in cell C2. But if I double click the dot and flash fill down, then I get 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m., 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. The reason for this is if you look at the formula, the E $3 didn't change from row to row. By putting the $sign in front of the 3, what I did was I made that row number absolute. This is what in Excel is called an absolute reference. Basically, all that means is once you put that number in, Excel shouldn't change it based on where you copy and paste that formula. It should stay exactly the same. So that way I'm pointing to specifically cell E3 rather than in general something over here in column E that matches up with where the formula is, the relative position of the formula. So this cell to this cell, and then this cell to this cell, and then this cell to this cell, etc. So if I were to copy and paste the formula elsewhere on the sheet in another column, it would also change that column letter. But again, our session length is specifically in cell E3. So if I wanted to make really, really sure we were only pointing to cell E3, I could also put a $sign in front of the E so that the column letter wouldn't change when you copied and pasted either, or autofilled. So that works. So $sign E, $3. You'll see this in the future in future sessions. You'll see when Excel fills in a cell reference like this, the address of a cell. A lot of times Excel will automatically make it absolute like this. It'll put $sign E, $3 or whatever. So I wanted to show you this so that you wouldn't be thrown off by it. I also wanted to show you it so that you would know this is how you make sure that that stuff doesn't change, so you don't have to go back and correct 15 formulas after you copy and paste them in the future. But there's another way to do this that I like even better. I'm going to come up here to cell C2, click there, and I'm going to just delete where it says $sign E, $3. So backspace, backspace. And then, whoops, nope, sorry. Okay, got to do something else first. Sorry about that. I'm going to hit cancel here or press escape ESC at the top of my keyboard. And I'm going to click in cell E3 here. You'll notice we've ignored this for a while, but you'll notice we have our name box up here. And whenever I click in a cell, it just shows kind of the address of that cell, battleship style, I-10, R11, whatever the case may be. What we want to do, though, is we want to actually name this cell E3 here. So I'm going to click in, or I'm going to click to select it. And then I'm going to come up here to the name box. And where it says E3, I'm just going to type the word length instead and press enter on my keyboard. Pow. Okay. When I do that, basically nothing changes, except it now says length up here. If I click to one of these other cells, I still get K7, N1, O7, etc. But if I click over here, it now says length rather than E3. So watch what I can do with this now. I'm going to click back in cell C2, my original formula up top. I'm going to click in the formula bar, hit backspace a few times, and delete $sign E, $3. And instead, I'm going to type length right there. You'll notice when I do that, again, it color codes just like it did when I was using those addresses in my formulas. And then I'll hold Shift, press 0 to close my parentheses, hit the check mark or press enter to lock it in. And now I still get 10:30 a.m. And when I autofill this down, in each case, it says length here. That does a couple of useful things. Obviously, these names are a great replacement for our absolute reference, $sign E, $3. And in fact, if I were to paste the formula somewhere else in one of these other columns, it would still be length here, and it would still be pointing to cell E3 here on this sheet. In fact, anywhere in this entire workbook, if I use the word length in a formula, Excel is going to look back at this particular cell on this particular sheet. So cell E3 on the breakout session sheet. So that's really handy because you can use it all over the workbook without having to fill in the name of the sheet every time, which is a real pain. And this is really human readable. So anywhere you go in the workbook, if you're trying to write a formula, you don't have to look back here to go, oh yeah, it was on that breakout sessions sheet in cell E3. Instead, you can just go, okay, length is the name of the cell that has the length of sessions. And if we decide to go to 1 hour and 45 minutes, then you can change that, and anywhere else that you reference that name in the entire workbook, you'll get the updated length too. So that is absolutes and names. By the way, you can name ranges this way too. So I'll just come up here and do range, press enter. And now this range is named range, which probably would be a little confusing, but you know, it's cool. So that's absolutes and names. We're running a little low on time, so let's move on to a couple more examples here. I'm going to go to this date one sheet right here, and we're going to talk about in the next couple of examples some functions that use dates as that use dates to work properly or to do cool calculations for you. So on this sheet, I have I'm doing some freelance work. And so I've got my freelance clients over here. I've got the date that I received the assignment from them. I've got a description of what the assignment entails, or at least a reminder for me. And then here I have a column that says number of days old, but it's empty. So what I want to do, as you can imagine, is I want to have a formula here that calculates, oh my goodness, excuse me, the number of days that I've had this assignment. So in cell C2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click there, and I've got my, and I'm going to click in the formula bar and hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. Then I'm going to go, then I'm going to do actually a sum function again. So I'll type the word sum, open a set of parentheses, so shift 9. And then I'm going to go negative B2. So that's the date that I received the assignment, but I'm making it negative because I'm going to subtract it from something here in a second. I'm going to put a comma here, and then I'm going to type the word today, open a set of parentheses, so shift 9, and I'm going to close it right back, shift 0. Then I'm going to close my original set of parentheses that go with the sum function. So shift 0 again. And there we have it. It's so what this is doing, we've got a new function in here. The new function is this today function. Your computer has a clock in it, and in fact, a clock battery. Even if it's a desktop computer, it's got a little battery, kind of like a watch battery, that helps your computer keep track of the date and time, even if it's turned off. So your computer knows what date and time it is. And so this today function, what it does is it says, hey, computer, what time and date is it? And the computer says, oh, you know, today is March 28th. And it fills in that date in your formula. So when I put the today function there, all it does is just stands in for today's date, whatever today happens to be. And then I've got negative B2. So I'm actually, as I mentioned, we can add and subtract dates in Excel really easily. So what I'm doing here is I'm subtracting the date I received the assignment from today's date, and that's going to give me a number of days, specifically 56. So 56 calendar days ago, I received this assignment from Bailey and to do something with a website. Great. And then I can come over here, double click this dot, and autofill it on down. So I got this assignment today. This assignment's 20 days old. This assignment's 258 days old. So that one might need some attention, and so on and so forth. So, so there it is. I've got all of these. I now have a way, and whenever I put in a date, it'll automatically subtract it from today, or yeah, it'll automatically subtract it from today, so I can keep track of when I received all these assignments, how old they are, and I can prioritize a little more effectively. The main thing I wanted to show you, though, is this today function, because the today function just fills in whatever today's date is. So if I just do equal sign today, open my parentheses, close them, then it's going to fill in 3/28/22. That's today. Oh, Susie in the chat is asking, can you put today minus B2 in that order? Kind of. The way that I wrote the formula, you couldn't quite do that. You could, because you would still need the comma in there. So you would go today and then a set of parentheses, comma, negative B2. You could write it a little more simply, though, if you wanted to. Another equally workable way to do this would be to go equal sign today, open your parentheses, close them, minus B2. That would also work. But you know, again, so that folks get used to using the functions, that's why I wrote it this way. But yeah, this is totally workable. If you were just to swap them though, strictly, like if I move the B3, like if you were to swap them and you left the comma out like this, today minus B3, that would not work. Well, I guess it did. Interesting. Well, oh, maybe because this is a function. Anyway, normally that would not work, because normally what you would have would be two numbers right up next to each other. And inside of the sum function, you're basically trying to do two different kinds of math. You're like adding, subtraction, very confusing. But yeah, you can totally write it in a different way. Something like this would be the cleanest way to do it. And that would probably be the way I would do it if not for if it wasn't for an example in class. That's a great question, Susie. Thank you so much. Let's go to our date 2 sheet here. Excellent. So this is a similar example. We've got our same clients. We've got our same descriptions, but this time we have due dates over here rather than the date we received the assignment. So what I want to do here is I want to see how much time I have to finish working on this project, or on each project, right? So to do that, I'm going to click in cell C2, click in the formula bar, hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. And I'm going to type net work days, open a set of parentheses. And then inside of the parentheses, I have start date, end date, and holidays. That's what I'm being prompted for this time. So it's a little bit different from our, a lot of our functions that are basically like, put some numbers here. Instead, we're being prompted for start date, end date, and holidays. That's what this net work days function needs. So what this does, well, let me show you actually. We'll fill it in there and then we'll talk about what it does. So our start date is just going to be the date. Well, it's just going to be today. So again, I'm going to use the today function. So I'll type today, open a set of parentheses, close them right away. So that's shift 9, shift 0. Then I'll put a comma there. That's the end of that argument. So that's our start date. Our end date argument is going to be, well, the due date of the assignment, right? So I'm going to go B2. There we go. And again, that's color coded for me in blue, so I can tell that I'm pointing to the correct cell with the right date in it. And then there's an optional argument here. You can tell it's optional because it's in square brackets, called holidays. I'm not going to use that for the moment, but I'll tell you about it in just a second. I'm going to hold shift, press 0 to close my parentheses that go with the net work days function. And I'm going to hit the check mark to lock it in. And now we have -20. So what this is, net work days is a function. When you're doing stuff like this, it's particularly useful. The way it works is it counts specifically weekdays between the start date and the end date that you give it. So in this case, the start date is today, because if I haven't worked on this assignment so far, then today is the earliest that I can start, right? And our end date is the due date. In this case, when it was supposed to be done. In between those two dates, you have 20 weekdays. Unfortunately, if you have a different, if you have a different type of schedule, Sometimes I work Saturdays, things like that. It's not going to allow you to tweak it to that extent. But assuming that you work Monday through Friday, you can use this to calculate how many work days you have to get an assignment done, or in this case, how many work days I'm late on an assignment. I'll double click the little dot here to fill this in the rest of the way. I've got 22 work days left on this, 8 work days left on this, 15 work days left on this. See, the thing about this is, if I look at this, so I've got, this is April 6th, 2022. Right now it's March 28th. If I'm looking at my calendar, I'm going, April 6th is a little while. I've got, if I'm looking at my calendar, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep. Okay. I've got 9 days, including April 6th, right? But in actuality, I don't have 9 days to work on it because I'm going to have a weekend. So, well, I calculated that oddly. That, all right. I don't know. I think I counted wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's counting today. So if it were today, it'd be 1. So counting today, I have that, I have 10 days if I'm looking at the calendar, but actually I only have 8 days that I would be working on it because I'm not going to work on it during the weekend. So this will give you a better idea of realistically how to manage your time. The holidays argument there, when you'll notice when I had the little prompt up here, it had holidays in square brackets. What that does, I'll hit cancel, is if you put a comma and then you add a range of cells, say I4 to I20 or whatever, then in that range of cells, you can list dates that will be holidays or that you're taking off with paid time off or whatever. So if, for example, okay, this is a good example. This assignment is due on February 4th of 2023. So I have 225 days, except that I don't, because like Thanksgiving and Christmas are in there and stuff like that. So I could put like 12/25 2022 and 12 24 2022 for Christmas Eve or whatever the case may be. I can list those dates, and Excel will also deduct 1 from each, or from this total for any of those days that you aren't going to be working. And that's really helpful. That way, if you're looking at an assignment, but you're going to be gone the next week, and then the assignment's due the week after, you might think you have a lot more time than you actually have to get it done. So that can be really, really helpful to calculate like this. All right. So we've got one more set of examples here for creating charts. I know that we are just a smidge over our time. If anybody does need to dash, I totally understand, and you can catch up and watch the rest of it, anytime on the YouTube channel, cals.link/YouTube. Make sure you're registered for next week's session. If you need to duck out now, head to cals.org/tech-classes to do that. But let's go ahead and tackle our last set of examples here for anybody who can hang out for the next few minutes. So in this example, our last example data set here, I have a list of I have a list of 5 salespeople and their number of units sold over the course of 2 years for each quarter. So these are the quarterly numbers for year 1. These are for quarter 1, year 1, quarter 2, year 1, quarter 3, year 1, etc. Excuse me. So I want to represent this visually somehow, because of course, looking at these numbers, it just looks like a jumble and you can't really tell how things are going or how folks are doing statistically, that sort of thing. And so we want to be able to analyze this a little bit better. So here's what I'm going to do. I've got my, I'm going to first come over here and I'm going to select my data. So I'm going to hold down with my mouse button in cell A1 and drag down here until I get to cell I6. That is going to, and so I've got all of the data selected. And now I'm going to come up to the top and I'm going to go to insert and I'm going to hit recommended charts right here. There we go. Okay. So when I hit recommended charts, it gives me a few different options here, depending on what version of Excel you're using. Your options that you see may be different, but it's going to give me a few different options here that I can choose from in order to represent this data. So one way that it suggests is this, what it calls a clustered column chart. So it's got, so each person has a color representing them, and then there are various bars, and they are clustered together for each quarter, right? There's also a stacked column chart where it stacks it all up so that you can see kind of a grand total along with the relative amount that each individual contributed to that total, stuff like that. And there's bar charts and clustered bar chart and stacked bar chart, which is pretty similar. There's a whole bunch of other stuff, this funnel thing, which it's confusing to me. I don't think it represents our data very well. And this Pareto, which basically, I don't know. This is very confusing. I'm not sure what to make of this. I'm sure it's good for some representing some kind of data or another, but maybe not what we're looking for. What we want to track is each individual salesperson's progress over time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click all charts and I'm going to go to the line chart here. Now there's a bunch of different options for the line chart, and there are a bunch of different types of charts that we can do. So you could do a pie chart. You could do an area chart. You could do this radar thing, which is real wild looking. There's all kinds of stuff you can do here. I definitely recommend poking around and playing with it, seeing what, if you've got a data set you want to represent in a chart, look around and see what the best way you can find is to represent your particular set of data that you're working with. In this case, though, we've got our line chart. We've got our stacked line chart. We've got a 100% line chart, and so on and so forth. And there's ones with little data points that marked in each of the spots. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick with the regular old line chart. And I'm going to look at these two variations here. This one has a line for each person, each salesperson. This one has a line for each quarter, which is extremely confusing and does not make sense. So we're going to stick with this default one. I'm going to click OK. And now it drops our chart into our sheet here. Now you can do this a number of different ways. If you didn't want the chart on the sheet, you can click Move Chart up here, and you can place it on either a new sheet or an existing sheet that you select from this drop-down box. I don't want to do that in this particular instance because it makes it harder to read, actually. So we're just going to leave it as is, but I do want to mention that that's there. So we can change the chart type if we're like, oh, this wasn't the right kind of chart for this data. You just click Change Chart Type, and then you get this same pop-up box again. You can select data. If you left some data out accidentally when you were selecting originally, you can change it, or if you add more data later on, and you can switch the rows and columns in your chart so that they're in the right place. You can also change the look of it. So up here at the top, I've got kind of the basic sort of look, but I could add this nice little gradient and have these big dots with the data points, which actually looks a little cluttered. So we're not going to do that. And I have a whole bunch of different variations here. There's like this one with cross hatching in the background. this one with horizontal lines. If I click this more button down here, the little like line with the arrow, then I can see all the different options. My personal favorite is the laser tag look right here, style 9. So you've got that nice little nice setup there. And so now I can watch, for example, here's Falana, the orange line. So she starts out here with around 800 sales. If I move my mouse over it, you can actually see the value at 796, and then goes down slightly here in Q2, goes down precipitously in Q3, but bounces back in Q4, and kind of goes back and forth as the time goes on, and almost hits the peak again in the third quarter of year 2. So you can kind of track that. You can mouse over and you can just see the data at a glance. So you can see like she's had a lot of ups and downs here, basically. And you can track that for a lot of people. So this is a really nice way to represent essentially like how these sales people's numbers are doing, and kind of keep track of that over time for each individual salesperson. There's some other stuff you can do to change the look or the layout of this chart. So if I go up here to format, I can change things. I can get a little more detailed with like changing colors and fonts and things like that. I could rename my chart. This is a little weird, but bear with me. If I click up here where it says chart title, click again in there so that I get the blinking cursor, I could change it to sales numbers or whatever. And then this is very important. Don't press enter when you type that in. Click somewhere else in the chart, and that will lock in the title. For some reason, if you press enter, it's going to move your selection to some other cell on the sheet, and that can throw people off. If you click somewhere outside of this of the chart, by the way, you'll notice the chart specific options that I had up at the top disappear. If I click again, though, then I get them back, but I'm not looking at them right away. I actually need to click these new tabs up here that have appeared: chart design and format. So there's a bunch of stuff you can do here. You can even name the chart, the area of the chart itself, and so on and so forth. So you can also change what information is displayed. If I click this plus sign over here where it says chart, it says chart elements. If I mouse over it, I can change whether we have these axes here. In other words, the stops on the side and on the bottom. If I uncheck that, those disappear. Check it again, they come back. I could add axis titles, so I could label like quarters or number of units sold or whatever. I could toggle whether the title of the chart shows up at all. Maybe I don't need it. I could have data labels. And by the way, if I check this, but then I also go over here and hit this arrow, you'll notice I can tweak where the labels appear. So they can be centered over the data point, to the left of the data point, to the right, above it, below it. They could be a call out, which is real messy right now, unfortunately. Or there are more options down here if you click on that, which we're not going to dig into too deep there. You can, particularly useful if it's on another sheet, you can have a version of the table right here at the bottom so that folks can see the raw data. You can have error bars if you're doing statistics. The grid lines in the background, you can remove those, re-add them. You can, I've got it just added the horizontal back. I want the vertical back too. So there we go. The legend, which of course shows the color coding. Blue is for Egan, orange is for Falana, and all that stuff. A trend line. So you can turn that on, but it's a trend line based on one individual series. So one of these color coded lines. And then up and down bars to kind of see the movement here of of your numbers. Okay, so chart styles, we looked at that up above, and you can also change the color scheme if you want to by clicking color. And then finally, there's this filter area here. If I click on the little funnel, let's say that Helen leaves the company. I'll uncheck the box next to her series here and click apply. And now Helen's line, which was gray, is gone. So we're just getting these 4 folks. And then over here under categories, I have, I could, for example, only show the year 1 numbers. So if I uncheck year 2, all the year 2 selections here, then I just see the year 1 numbers. And that is pretty much it. What questions do y'all have for me before we wrap it up for today? I'm actually going to uncheck this and do select all on both of these so that I get the chart back the way it was. All right. I don't see anything. If you are typing a question, keep typing. If you think of a question later, or if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube or somewhere, then feel free to shoot me an email. nsmith@cals.org is a good email address to use. And don't forget, of course, next week we have Excel Part 3. Part 3 is going to be formulas and charts. So we're going to dig, actually, I named it incorrectly. So we're going to talk about color coding. We're going to talk about a bunch of other really useful stuff, protecting against errors or accidental changes, stuff like that. So I'm gonna change the way this is listed, but this is the link to register for next week's class, 9:30 to 11, just like this week's class. And of course, you can go ahead and click the link that says the other sessions on that page and sign up for Part 4 2 weeks from today, which is going to have to do with data validation, or excuse me, with pivot tables and VLOOKUP, which are really, really useful tools that can seem a little intimidating to folks, but I promise you'll get a lot of use out of them. All right, I don't see any more questions, so I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all so much for joining me. Have a fantastic rest of your day and your week, since it's Monday. Thank you, Susie. Glad to have you here. And I will hopefully see everybody next week. Bye now.